Hello and welcome. Wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us for the Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. We are here to talk to eco-minded and socially conscious travelers, diversity and inclusion specialists, wildlife conservationists, environmental activists, and anyone using travel as a way to uplift and inspire. Together, we will go a step beyond the Instagram-ready world of travel and take a look at how travel can be a source of growth and development for all people in all communities. And now, here's your host, Amy Hager.
So joining me today remotely from Kansas City is Hyungjoon. He's our board treasurer here at the Rise Travel Institute. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, so I want to start out by asking you, because we're going to get into your background and like everything along those lines. You have such a great story, but I'm curious, like why are you involved at the Rise Travel Institute? What drew you to us?
Yeah, so Vinci, who is the founder of Rice Travel Institute, right? Her and I, we met through the Institute of Humane Education, where we were both in a graduate program. And humane education is a field of study that looks at the interconnectedness between issues of social justice, sustainability, and protecting other species. And so for both of us, we were already engaging in trying to understand better about the systems that in our lives. And we wanted to create a world where both of us are working towards creating a world where the different pieces and the connectedness can also kind of work for all beings.
Yeah.
Um, my thing was I'm an educator. I'm a K-12 teacher, and I wanted to engage into teaching these topics and systems thinking and strategic thinking in the field of education. And I think Vinci, for her passion in traveling and recognizing also that traveling can create negative impact or harmful impact to the local people, local flora and fauna, or and a lot of different connected issues with that. So like even though my field is in education, I've also traveled a lot from a pretty young age. I actually grew up both in Korea and in the United States, and I got to start like looking at the world through more of a global lens and then a local lens from a pretty young age. And I was traveling a lot in my teens and 20s in international traveling and going to um, different parts of the world. And when Vinci and I met at the Institute of Humane Education, we were there for the summer. So they had a summer program, part of their larger graduate program. We talked about the impact of the need for this type of lens, this systemic lens in the field of education, as well as in the field of travel, in the travel industry as well. And I've spent a lot of my adult life living abroad as well. So understanding like not just in travel, but the long-term impact of being a foreigner living in a foreign country, and um, the different dynamics that exist between um, you know the country of origin and class, and all of those things play a big role. And so um, always just kind of taking time to think about these things and wanting to do more. And then when Vinci founded Rise Travel Institute and asked me to come on board, I was like, yeah, absolutely. This is a great opportunity for me to try to, make more connections and work towards sustainability in multiple industries.
Yeah.
And this is so related to my field as a K-12 educator as well, because I really think about this for my students, and how I was impacted so much through my travels from my teenage and early 20s years, and to think about like what I gained, the ability to like broaden my worldview, or the opportunities to broaden my worldview, and to start seeing the world more as through a global perspective, and understanding what it means to be a global citizen. So I want to be able to provide more opportunities like that and connections like that for my students as I also embark on my career. And so, you know,
Yeah.
being connected to Rise is really awesome.
I love that. Well, so then tell me a little bit more about your background with like the travel, living in different countries and such. But also, why don't we start off with what are you up to right now? You keep saying that you're a K-12 educator. Like, are you teaching at a high school in Kansas City there?
Yeah, so I'm currently teaching biology here.
Okay.
I actually left the classroom for about a couple of years. I was working on a project in Guatemala involved with creating like a retreat space and like a workshop space for educators and activists. And you know, I was really like in the kind of the phase of developing infrastructure. So I was doing a lot of building and
Wow.
I was getting ready to just kind of like start doing some pilot programs there when the pandemic hit, and I was just kind of stuck because I couldn't make a lot of progress with any of the building, or
Oh,
I
yeah.
was also starting to run out of funds and things, and so I decided, you know, it would be okay to spend some time being back in the U.S. And pursuing, you know, also I guess I don't want to say like I feel like I don't feel like I have to choose one or the other. Like it's what I
Yeah.
realized kind of during this pandemic is that I could really be continuing and developing my career in education, which I kind of put on the back burner. But you know, I've always been passionate about being in the classroom and working with students, and so um, you know, I want to. Now I'm kind of at the phase where a lot of the buildings are getting completed, and so like the infrastructure is kind of in place, and so I'm starting to develop more of an action plan of how all of this is going to play out, um, and now being in this situation in the U.S. part time and in Guatemala part time, like how those things are gonna, I guess, support one another in the advancement. So yeah.
That sounds really fun. So then where in Guatemala is this retreat center that you've been working on?
So it's at this lake called Lake Atitlan, which I think is one of the most beautiful places in Central America, if not the world. And yeah, I actually I had initially gone to Guatemala to teach biology at an international school in the capital city, and you know, I can talk, you know, maybe we can talk a little bit about that later too, about some of the problems that are associated with, I think, the whole concept of international teaching or bringing
Hmm.
an education to other regions of the world. But
Yeah.
so while I was doing that, I was living in the city and, you know, always needing to like reconnect with nature and needing peace
Mhm.
and quiet. And so I started to take these trips out to the lake almost like every other weekend. I'd be there. It was about a 2.5, 3 hour drive over there, and so I'd go and just like you know, spend the weekend and come back. And I realized that, you know, I could be doing more, you know, to kind of like uh you know, fulfill my needs, as well as trying to think about what are the impacts that I could have to some of the um, inequalities and
Mhm.
injustices that I saw. And so, um, you know, my biggest thing at that moment when I started the project was concern for the environment, and always feeling like the infrastructure, the systems that we operate within an urban setting, there's so much like even when it comes to like water treatment, or you know, sewage treatment, or even accessibilities to food or where they
Yeah.
come from, like all of these things just seem like, man, there are just so many better ways to do this. And I started to really get into this idea of like homesteading and permaculture and intentional communities. And so I decided, well, maybe I'll go and try this out and see, you know, I still have this kind of this career in the city, and so I can kind of go back and forth and see how it
Yeah.
goes. So I went and started, you know, building. I bought a small piece of land and started. I built a tiny house. I didn't personally build it with my two hands, but you know, I worked with a contractor to build a bamboo house.
Wow.
Which, you know, I want to just plug in real quick about there's this company is called CASA, CASSA, and what they do is they work with sustainable building, and they are also very much like systems thinkers in that they look at a house or shelter as this full system that needs to really meet more than just like a roof over your head, right?
Yeah.
In places, in especially in the rural parts of Guatemala, there's issues with people using wood fire in close proximity to their living quarters, and then not always having access to clean water, not always having access to sewage systems, and so
Mhm.
um, the what they do is they really look at like housing as this full system where all of these different components are necessary to have the quality of life that people deserve. And so
Great.
they have figured out all of these systems to be able to put in to like existing houses or new houses, ways to collect water, filter it, and use it, and ways to have its own black water and gray water system. So and
Oh,
solar
wow.
panels. So everything's like off grid, and everything's um, like just really sustainable in that they're really thinking about the negative impact that housing systems have on the environment,
Mhm.
as well as the social justice pieces of bringing like bringing these opportunities to um, have quality housing that allows them to pursue other um, desires in their lives, whether it's
Huh.
career or family or etc. And so they work a lot with impoverished communities as well, helping them like secure loans and things like that. So I think what they're doing is really awesome. And so I got to work with them, and I'm continuing to work with them and building out this place. And my long-term goal is to host workshops for educators, for activists, and for students to start to engage in any of these topics, any of these issues that are societal and global and local as well, and just understanding it from a systemic point of view, and then
Mhm.
creating strategic ways that can bring solutions that's gonna not create more problems. And all of this is also rooted in like that graduate program I'm talking about, that I talked about
Right.
earlier with humane education. And so yeah, that's kind of like the direction I'm trying to go with my life and career.
That's kind of cool. So then, wow, like what an adventure. And so, what I want, speaking of adventures, so what I want to ask you, I just have so many questions going through my head now. Have there been any moments in your travel, either doing this project or even before this, that have created a positive impact on the area that you visited that you can kind of share and break down for us?
Yeah. Um, so that's a really good question. And a lot to think about with that question. I think about when I think about creating positive impact in the areas I visit. Um, I don't see this as something that can be done like on these like short-term trips, or even like
Yeah.
travel. Like I think about it like if you want to really create positive impact to an area, like you have to be there and be a part of that community and
Mm.
understand it from more than just like this outsider perspective. And that takes a lot of time, and that takes a lot of doing systems analysis, using different
Yeah.
tools, and really looking at all the connections, and getting a broader perspective by including local voices. And so when I think about my travels, generally when I think about the word travel, it's not the long term kind. Like
Yeah.
the long term kinds, when I go and stay there, I think of, I really sit and try to observe and take everything in, so I can start to kind of identify the different I guess the points of leverages that where I might be able to have an impact. So when I'm traveling, it's really hard to do that on a short term. So I mostly think about having just like less negative impact, right?
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Because when we think about travel, I think oftentimes we don't see, um, because it's designed for us not to see a
Yeah.
lot of the negative impact that we might have on the local people, or the flora, the fauna, um, uh, the environment as a whole, and like we don't think about the carbon footprint of flying as much as we should. So there's so many different things that are associated
Good
uh,
point.
negative impact that's associated with traveling, that is completely designed to be like, I mean, they're designed to be hidden like purposefully, right? Because we don't want people who are coming and spending money and there to like have a break or enjoy their time to have to engage with these tough issues, supposedly. Although I think, and I think Rise Travel Institute also thinks that, in fact, travelers do want that. They want to know if they're creating negative impact to an area they're visiting. And so, um, you know, uh, one of the things that also started to help me see my travel in that light was when I was traveling or when I was studying abroad as an undergraduate student. So I
Yeah.
did a semester abroad in Costa Rica, and it was through LASP, Latin America Studies program. And this was a program that was through I believe it's called the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities. I was attending a Nazarene University at
Oh,
the time.
okay.
I had the opportunity to go down there, and through that program, we were at a field station. I was there mostly for a biology study abroad program. So most of the times I was staying at this field station out in the forest, in the cloud forest, and most of the time just doing research, field research, and things there. But during that semester, we also got to take these trips to visit different regions of the country and to start to understand a lot of the social issues that were associated too. And then so as US citizens and young US citizens being there, I think most of us don't have the historical context because we're not taught this in school,
Yeah.
of like the influence that the United States had on the whole region, Central America, and even parts of South America as well. And so, what we got to really see during the time, and especially in Nicaragua, was like some of the instability that were created in that region as a result of U.S. interference. And
Wow.
I think generally, young Americans, and we tend to have this like believe in this myth that there's this like kind of American exceptionalism or that
Mm.
we're good guys. And so to go and to kind of just have my own worldview flipped upside down and to
Yeah.
start to think about like, well, I'm also this person coming from a privileged um, setting as being just from my country of origin, and just even having the financial freedom to be able to participate in these abroad programs and traveling and all of those things, had me start to think more about like well, the fact that I do have an impact.
So, how do you see the future of travel and even education of tomorrow?
Yeah, so as an educator, this is something I obviously think about a lot. I think we still like what we often forget is that our current model of education was
Mhm.
built like during and even currently, right? Like in the period of white supremacy.
Right.
It's very Eurocentric in that, everything's modeled off of like I mean the like I guess the Anglo way of education where they were dividing up subjects and age groups and and
Mhm.
giving them
Yeah.
these, like disconnected almost like bodies of knowledge to memorize and regurgitate, right?
Yeah.
And we're like so beyond that, right? Like we don't need to
Right.
be focusing on these things. I often tell my students like, well, if you needed to know something in a authentic real life experience, not at a test taking or that type of setting, which I don't
Great.
even know, I have issues with that on its own, but like where can you access information? And they're like, well, we have, all of us have phones or we can look things up, and
Right.
we all have access to, even if we didn't have access to it at that moment, like we can all find ways to find information and learn about information or review information that they've known previously. And so
Hmm.
the whole concept of education centered around like knowledge and information instead of like how to access information, how to distinguish and discern good information from bad information, truth from lies, or how we think about things and how we strategically think about things and how
Right.
we um, propose solutions about current global and societal issues. Like this is what education should focus around. And I think, when I think about if we can do that and if we can get students to think about these things in a systemic way, then how much that would change
Right.
like how people travel or how people interact with areas that are different from their local.
Yeah.
And this is why like Rise Travel Institute and what Rise is trying to do is so incredible, because it's filling that gap that is missing from our current K-12 education and even higher education.
Right.
And so when I look at Rise's approach of anti-oppressive lens and also systems thinking, strategic thinking, um, it's really exciting to see
Yeah.
that. And I believe, like, my hope and belief is that as we continue to have more of these types of opportunities for young people, and as well integrating these into K-12 education, so students are thinking about this from an early age, from a young age, that it would be those consumers and the travelers themselves that demand and expect these things from the industries themselves,
Right.
whether it's travel, the what is it, the transportation industry or the hotel industry,
Yeah.
like the tourism industry in general, just like creating these activities that are looking into impact on local people, impact on
Mhm.
local plants and animals and the environment, and our overall like this doom gloom, pressing issue of climate change, and just like taking a holistic approach, rather than like, hey, we're just here to do some entertainment or enjoyment activity without thinking about all of these things, which, again, like I keep reiterating that all of these things have been hidden from view from
Right.
us. And I think about a lot of my travels prior to, those trips in Costa Rica where I started to like shift in my way of viewing the industry, of like just partaking in these harmful behaviors without knowing,
Yeah.
uh, like the impact that I was having. And so, you know, I think with knowledge comes power, and knowledge comes responsibility also. And so,
True.
so like engaging in these educational opportunities, to get a better picture, the bigger picture, and a systemic picture of all of our connections, is just so awesome. And that's gonna be that's gonna lead into all of these other things, I hope,
Right.
like kind of falling into place. And so that's my crystal ball vision of our
I
future.
love it.
Of this.
Yeah. No, and again, like you've just made it so clear and a lot easier to understand really the systems and how they all do play together and how it's not, again, just like this one thing, it's all of these things, really.
Yeah.
And so I have one last question for you today. What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Okay, wow. So right now I'm working on developing this project for me in Guatemala, right? That
Right.
is for, again, trying to create a space for workshops and retreats, for activists, for educators, and, again, like kind of approaching it from an anti-oppressive lens. Like I have to think about like, I am occupying land that belongs to indigenous people. And I am there with all my privileges from my country of origin and from my background in education. And so, I need to understand my impact on the local population there, right? And so, um, what I also want to do is to create space and create opportunities for the local community to start to engage in the same issues, and to start to think about um, the systems and how we are privileged and oppressed by these various systems, and to
Mhm.
be able to identify our um, points of leverages where we can make a positive impact. And I believe that that will lead to empowering individuals, local
Yeah.
individuals, to be able to create systemic changes within their own communities. I really want to work with teachers, indigenous teachers in the regions to like, I have so much to learn from them, but
Right.
also to be able to kind of bring in some of these perspectives where they could really benefit from, um, this systemic thinking and strategic thinking as well, and to start to create educational systems where the students are gaining the knowledge, the understanding, and the disposition to themselves be the agents of change and the people to create these solutions to the local societal and global issues that we're currently seeing. And so yeah, I guess my I guess kind of the vision that I have is that I'll continue to be working in K-12 education and trying to
Yeah.
create systemic changes here in how we approach K-12 education, but to be able to also work with educators from all over the world, trying to start to bring in these components to our existing models of education, and to really engage in local empowerment, like and to create ways to, because another thing I'm really doing right now is like creating wildlife habitat,
Oh,
like
wow.
putting in installations that like I don't know, like butterfly gardens and
Mhm. Yeah.
permaculture installations and things that I think are systemic and sustainable, and in the way
Get
we're
it.
looking at these issues. And I am working with a really awesome NGO that does sterilization clinics for dogs without families and homes,
Mhm.
because that's an ongoing issue, not only for the dogs themselves, but for the people and for the wildlife in the mountains and things. And so, trying to think about what's the most humane approach we can take to start
Right.
to address issues from multiple perspectives. Like, I think we often fall into this like idea that we have to have this one thing that we're dedicated to and this one
Right.
thing that we're working in, but that's so far from the truth. Like, we have so much like
So much
influence,
complexity
and
to
yeah, in
it.
like ways that we have impact. And so
Yeah.
we can look at, starting from like our personal choices in our diet, in our where
Mhm.
we're spending our money, and et cetera, but all of these things can only happen through systems thinking, through critical thinking, through strategic planning. So I think this type of education that Rise is trying to do, the educational philosophy that I'm pushing as a K-12 educator, and what Institute of Humane Education is doing, what companies like CASA are doing. I think these are all just like a big, a part of this bigger movement to get us as a global society to essentially survive.
Well, Hyungjoon, thank you so much for spending time with me today and being on our show. I really appreciate you've uncovered so much and you're just making my head spin thinking about all the systems and everything. But also, you've broken it down really easily for me to understand. So I appreciate you so much.
Well, I really appreciate you. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk about issues that are very important to me and that I'm passionate about. So, really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to an end today. But if you've liked what you've heard and you want to hear more, please, please, please subscribe to our email list. It's at risetravelinstitute.org/subscribe. And here at the Rise Travel Institute, we really do believe travel is a powerful tool for positive, transformative change. And if you're a college student, maybe planning to study abroad like you did, or even that young professional thinking about a gap year, and really anybody who wants to travel the world in a sustainable way, I really encourage you to head to risetravelinstitute.org for more information on our educational courses and our program that's coming up in our pilot program. And we'll be back soon with another episode. But until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise traveler.
This podcast is an extension of the Rise Travel Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit committed to empowering young travelers through educational programs, research, study tours, and scholarships. Visit risetravelinstitute.org to learn more.